what is Syriza that everybody's talking about? Syriza is a coalition of the radical left. It has parties and movements. It is a coalition indeed, and it has been around in the Greek political life for 30 years now. It has been undergoing some transformation, of course, due to tensions between different factions within it. In 2009, in the general election, the party got roughly 5% of the vote. That was the year that Papandreou government ascended to power. And soon after that, the sovereign debt crisis broke out. And since then, different bailout packages have been discussed, and these have been accompanied by austerity measures, the so-called memoranda, 1, 2, 3 in the number, very much like what's happening right now in Cyprus. The same kind of blackmail, the same kind of bullying. And of course, that took us slowly and painfully to the 2012 elections. 2 elections within 4 months in the country, and in the last one, the Syriza got a stunning result, 27% of the vote. So from 5% to 27% within 3 years. So what was the reason for that extraordinary rise? This is a very big debate about this issue and a lot of arguments, but a combination really of factors led to that. Lef is going to talk more about it. But let me touch up on a few issues here. First of all, there was already a simmering grassroots movement that had developed within the society, and it was inspired by the Arab Spring and the Spanish Indignados. It was an anger and a movement, the anger that the movement had that was actually drawing from protests before 2009 and events that took place in Greece before 2009. There was a failing infrastructure in the public services, there was economic inequality in the society, and there was growing police and state repression. In 2008, in the streets of Athens, police shot down a young 15-year-old boy for no apparent reason, and that spurred huge demonstrations in the city and in the entire country. Now that was a year before the actual crisis broke out. Now on top of all this simmering anger, we have the imposition of the austerity measures with the bailout packages in 2009 and onward. And the population, particularly the lower and the middle class, is being hit disproportionately much compared to the other classes, and they see their earnings being lost, their wages, their salaries cut, their jobs lost, healthcare benefits cut, labor union rights restrictions. So people are protesting against this regime. The regime that was sustained for 30 years by 2 main political parties, and this system had to leave. They couldn't go anymore. So the choices in 2012 were really a protest vote. Indeed, was in part it was a protest vote, but it was not just that. The Greek people could have chosen any other political party from the spectrum at that moment. There was an assortment of liberal, conservative, rightist parties, as well as many left parties. For example, the traditional Communist Party, but they chose Syriza. Why? The Greeks are traditionally left-leaning. They have left-leaning tendencies, even if they vote differently. So Syriza is a left party which has been actively involved in all the civil and social rights movements. It has always been supporting social equalities, always protecting labor unions throughout Greece and throughout Europe. So people had something to vote that made a difference. Syriza has been protecting the rights of immigrants, of the people who are losing jobs, right? But also the immigrants against Golden Dawn and the rising neo-fascists in Greece. Now they're in the parliament. Syriza also was never a part of this corrupt state. So this is the role that Syriza had prior to the crisis. And after the crisis, Syriza was the only party that was openly against the bailout and the memoranda and this internal devaluation that was proposed. and exposed the responsibilities not only of the interest groups within the country, such as the media moguls, the ship owners, the construction companies, and so forth, which were entangled with the political power, the ruling party in Greece, and exposed the European counterparts, like, for example, the deregulation in the international banking system and the stances of the European Central Bank and the IMF. So here, Syriza was saying from the very first moment what everyone comes to realize now, 4 years later, that this crisis is a systemic crisis of the capitalistic system. It's not a Greek affair alone. Today, Syriza has not dropped any of his electoral appeal. Its approval rate is still about 30%, perhaps slightly even ahead of New Democracy. So what we view is that Syriza has to win, must win the next elections to help guide Greece outside of this crisis and to help build the crisis that the Greece that we want. And Syriza also represents a big hope for the international socialist movement and the social struggles for Europe, but also for countries well beyond Europe, like the US, and beyond that as well. To do so, it has to draw support from the low and middle working class and the labor unions and the movements. And this is what Lef will talk right now.
So my name is Lefteris, which is a typical Greek name, but it's a bit confusing for my friends in Britain, so people call me either Lef or Left, which is a compliment. All right? So I'm here to give a presentation. Natasha told me try not to be academic, so I will skip a lot of slides in order to leave more time for discussion and reflection afterwards. So what's the interesting thing about Greece? Of course, it's the epicenter of the class struggle globally at the moment, and partly this is related to the impressive rise of Syriza and the impressive mobilization of working people, but also the impressive frustration that Troika is so generous to the people of this country. Of course, Greece is not the exception. Of course, the situation in Greece and the austerity measures that are taken there is not something new. But what is the interesting thing about Greece is that there is a big chance for proper change. And proper change, I mean, for a radical turn, in the sense that working people, working class people will manage to take over their destiny and take future in their own hands. So the big thing though about the Greek crisis is that there are a lot of bogus neoliberal narratives about the actual reasons that caused this crisis. And this is related to what is traditionally known as the case when you ask people the wrong questions. So when you ask people the wrong questions, you don't have to worry about the answers you get. So let me now start with my theoretical departures, because we are all slaves of a theory. So we are working on a big project with a radical American professor at Greenwich, and I'm delighted to work with Ian Greer. And we consider that neoliberalism itself is a term that describes the situation and the changes that are taking place globally in purely political terms. What is the actual, what is the most important thing is not just the changes in political system or the changes that are inherently political, of course, but I think as an analytical conception, it's better to use the term of marketization. Why? Because it seems that transactions are the most important units of analysis in what's going on globally, in the sense that markets are growing all the time, and they are growing in the most basic areas that traditionally the state used to cover, like health, employment, education, and so on. So we have more and more transactions, we have more players in that, we have greater competition, and actually competition based on the price, which is always a very convenient case to have more monopolies. Don't forget that, for example, European Union was created, except of course for the reason to restrain Germans in having another world war, just to expand business opportunities, and at the end we realize that we have more stronger monopolies instead of smaller companies being dominant in the markets. So we have constant changes, and this situation of marketization, this situation of constant commodification of everything, including labor, including health, including education, including our own lives, cannot operate without certain mechanisms. And those mechanisms are changes in the behavior of the firms, in the sense that companies now operate, first of all, in order to protect their shareholders, to give money back to their own shareholders, instead of providing jobs, instead of making sometimes proper, serious investments. And another mechanism that is very, very crucial is the way that you need to break up civil society resistance. So you need to demobilize all civil actors that can put a brake on the constant process of marketization. And of course you need to disorganize institutions, including trade unions and radical or left-wing political parties. And the effects of that, of course, is greater inequality. But when we talk about inequality, it's not just enough to talk about the rich and the poor, because there is also inequality in the level of representation, in the voice of people. We were talking with Natasha earlier on about the situation in Greece before the crisis, and I think we have some common narratives of this lack of voice, because the oligarchs, the power relations there, have created a situation long time ago of many people being in the society without a proper voice, without proper representation. Young people is the most typical example. Migrant workers, female workers, precarious workers in general. And of course, inequality in the sense of upward mobility. People now, the younger people, for example, have to live and have to face much more tough conditions and situations than their own parents. So the whole notion of inequality is enriched and is expanding. So now I'm going to the situation, to what's going on in Greece. And we have, let me please say some characteristics about the nature of the Greek crisis. First of all, it's ongoing. There is no definite end into that painful journey of austerity. Secondly, it's severe and all-embracing. It affects all aspects, all dimensions of the employment relationship. Wages, pensions, working hours, work-life balance, everything. Thirdly, it's unconstitutional. It puts the legal and political order of Europe, and Greece, of course, at a huge risk. The letter and the spirit, but also the way that the Troika measures are implemented are really out of any proper logic of the traditional inheritance of the European social model. More important than that, it's a humanitarian tragedy. There are people that are dying in Greece at the moment because of those tough austerity measures. And of course, it's not the elite, all right? The elite is still going cruising in beautiful islands. They enjoy the sun and everything. It's the working class people that really suffer. And this, of course, creates, finally, a widespread legitimization crisis of the political system, which practically means that we don't know what to expect, that the situation is very, very fragile. And partly this explains the unfortunate rise of the Golden Dawn in Greece. So, what I want to do in the next 10 minutes, perhaps it will take long, but I will try to stick to that, just 10 minutes, is to say a few things about the way that we have to conceptualize the Greek crisis, or this is my view at least, because of those dispersion of neoliberal bogus narratives in the mainstream media. Secondly, to talk a bit about the reforms and their outcomes. And finally, to go to the stages and the forms of resistance to the Troika measures, including, of course, the dramatic rise of Syriza. So there are two main views about the causes of the Greek crisis. The first is the approach that what happened in Greece is something that is related to national peculiarities, to the way that the Greek economy and society is organized, and basically the reason for that is that there is no modernization of the Greek economy in the traditional capitalist frames. The second opinion is that, okay, Greece cannot be blamed for how the global financial system operates. Greece itself is not to blame for the false assumptions under which the European Monetary Union project was established. And of course, Greece is not the reason for the modern geopolitical antagonism. And here I will say some things about the role of Germany at the moment in the German hegemony in Europe. So the first approach, the mainstream approach, the approach that you will see in the mainstream media. Greeks have to pay their debt because they created this debt, because they are basically overprotected, because labor market is over-regulated, because Greek workers used to enjoy a lot of privileges, they used to have a lot of benefits, very generous benefits by the state, and so on. They also have to pay because they are Mediterraneans, which for those people means that they have an inherent approach to resist to the issues of order, not to pay their taxes, to be bad boys, to have a low administrative capacity for policy implementation, because they don't pay their taxes and because they told a lot of lies in order to get an entry in the Eurozone. So that's the first approach, the mainstream approach, and it's not something new, of course. The governments by PASOK with the so-called modernizers used to, actually, the current Minister of Finance, Naras, was also a great fan of those ideas, used to continually propagandize this idea for reform, to modernize the Greek economy, to modernize the Greek economy. The same way as OECD, IMF, the World Bank used to say in their own reports in the past. The same way that SEV, the SEV is the Confederation of Greek Industry, the same way they did in the past. Practically, this type of, types of reforms they proposed was just to cut wages, to reduce pensions, to eliminate the welfare state, to privatize more, and so on. And that's why there is a peculiar, but in my view, it's a rumor that has strong grounds of truth, a peculiar rumor in Greece that the memorandum agreements were not written actually in offices in Washington or in Brussels. They were written in offices in Athens by all those people that they were advocates of flexible labor markets, of greater privatization, of greater outsourcing and restructuring exercises. And if you go into to the website and you look all the reports of the IMF, all the recommendations made by the OECD, and all the claims, the claims that the Confederation of Greek Industry used to do in the past, in the last 2 decades, you will realize that it's like reading the memorandum agreements that they were established and start to implement in Greece after 2010. So here is a table that shows an index produced by the OECD the Employment Protection Legislation Index practically means how strict and rigid is the labor law in each country. And here, obviously, you will realize that Greece has a high score that is declining, obviously, since early 90s, it's declining. And for all those advocates, the modernizers, the IMF, the World Bank, this was just a very good case to claim that Greece was a very rigid, Greek labor market was very rigid, and that this creates a lot of problems and losses in the national economic competitiveness. But of course you will realize that Germany also has a high score. So practically this index is very, very vulnerable, and the argument based on that index is very, very vulnerable. There were also other complaints by the modernizers. For example, why Greeks have a universal collective bargaining coverage rate, why Greeks are not like the people in the States, for example. And sorry for being a bit I don't want to be rude here, but I just find it disgraceful in USA to be covered by a collective agreement only if you are a member of a union. Right? In Greece we used to have a national collective agreement, and according to that everybody had some sense of protection on a basic minimum level income and protection. But this is a problem for the advocates of marketization ideas and the advocates of flexible labor markets. So that was the first view. Let's go to the second view that pays attention and focus on how the global financial system operates, about the Eurozone project, the assumptions under which this project was established, and of course about the Greek capitalism. So here is a diagram. I don't want to stick so much on that. It's just that there are three diagrams in the row that are quite impressive in my view. Here you see the nominal unit wage cost. Before 2000, the year that the Eurozone project was established, you will realize that in Germany the nominal unit wage cost was much higher than all the other troubled economies in Europe at the moment. Greece, Ireland, Spain, Italy and Portugal. After 2000, you will realize that Germany had the lowest rate. So it's sorry, Natasha, it's this line, right? So that's a quite interesting point. Here in this slide, you see the nominal wage per hour worked by all employees in the economy. And here you will realize that in Germany it used to be higher and it's still higher because wages are higher. So German employers pay more to their own workers, but the wage cost pay more than to their employees, but the wage cost they have is much lower. So that's a bit strange, isn't it? But the answer is the difference in productivity levels. And what the Eurozone project managed to do is to make the German industry much more competitive than the others. And partly this is also, we need to blame a bit, in my view, the German trade unions, especially IG Metall, because IG Metall covers the metal manufacturing industries, which is the export industries in Germany, because they signed wage concession agreements. So we created a common economy, right, a common zone based on the same interest rates, but with many differences in the competitive levels, and the German trade unions managed to make Germany much more competitive than the other economies. Is this bad? No, it's not bad. But I think, and please don't let me be misunderstood, I have nothing against Germany and the German people. I'm just trying to say that things could have been better if German employees could get more out of their high performance and productivity levels. German workers, the wages of German people have to be increased. This would be a great thing for all the economies and all workers across Europe, and especially Southern Europe. And here in this diagram, it gives us exactly what I'm trying to say with the wage concession agreements that the German trade unions agreed on in the last 2 decades. The relative productivity of Germany in comparison to all the other Eurozone member countries was increased, while the relative real wages was reduced. And this creates, of course, a lot of problems and asymmetries in the competitiveness level of the national economies. Let's go to another important issue that usually Greece is to blame. That public spending in Greece is extremely high. So you need to make huge cutbacks in health, education, and welfare. And as you will see here, in this diagram from 1988 to 2009, the year before the Troika measures in Greece, you will realize that the difference was not dramatic. Actually, public spending in Greece was higher in comparison to the European Union 27 and European Union 15 only after 2006. And the difference after that, even that, was not great. But in Greece, yes, there is an issue with the collection of taxes, all right? There's a big issue. And this diagram tells us that the Greek state was unable to collect the taxes as they did in the past. And if we look on the taxation system in Greece, we will realize that the direct tax rate was extremely low, and that the money that the government managed to collect by taxing rich people by direct taxes was not great. Almost 70% of the state revenues come from indirect taxes and from ordinary workers and pensioners. So I'm saying this, and at the same time I'm getting a bit angry, so sorry for my passionate way a bit, but it's a kind of a strange situation. And I'm getting more angry when I'm looking also on the mismanagement of public money, of the money that were collected, as I said earlier, by the ordinary workers. And here you will look a lot of stadiums that were built in order to serve the Olympic dream of 2004. So, for example, the Olympic Stadium of Oaxaca in Marousi, the initial estimation for building this stadium was 3.1 million euros. The final cost was almost 400 million euros, which is it's a deviation of about 13,000%. All right, 13,000%. Okay, so looking on this data, I'm getting more angry, and I want to collect more data. And looking on many surveys, by 2008, by 2009, before the departure of Troika, I realized that poverty was there, that private debt was increased from 43% in 2000 to more than 100% in 2010, which practically means that if Greeks used to live, let's say, better in economic terms in the last decades, was basically because the banking system opened the door to everyone and provided a lot of mortgages and so on. And at the same time, the politicians were hiding the truth about the mismanagement of public economics, hiding the truth about the real role and the way that the Eurozone project operates, about the tough situations that young people, migrants, female workers have to face in the labor markets, even long before the crisis. And the poverty was hidden because in Greece, as in all Southern European countries, we have what Actually, El Greco had a picture in the Holy Family, right? We have a peculiar way of providing intergenerational solidarity and support. So that's why you see a tall man, 35 years old, still living with his mama, and this is an acceptable norm. But it's terrible, because it shows how fragile, how vulnerable now are the transitions to adulthood by many young people in Greece and in the south. And this is a long story. This is something that happened even before the crisis. But before the crisis, at least there was a banking system that provided easily mortgages, and there were a lot of EU funds coming for large infrastructure works like the Olympics in 2004, and we couldn't really see that. Not everyone, of course, because Syriza used to say this, to claim that this was not a sustainable way of economic development in the past. Don't forget that Greece, after Ireland, had the highest economic growth rates between 1994 to 2008. So the country in Europe, in the Eurozone, with the highest GDP growth was found in 2010 the country with the highest debt. How is that? So, of course, other very negative developments in the labor market. As I said, I will skip a lot of slides in order to leave more time for discussion. I will just mention that Greece was accused by IMF, OECD many times that we had a very strict regulatory framework of industrial relations, which is not true, of course, because many workers were not covered at all, like what we call the pseudo self-employed people, those that they are in the gray zone between self-employment and typical wage employment. Another important issue is the fact that in order for a union to be established at company level, you need at least 21 members. But the vast majority, almost 98% of Greek companies, employ less than 20 people. So the regulatory framework was anti-union itself. And that's why there is no trade union representation at workplace level. And that's why Greece has so many strikes, general, national strikes. Actually, between 1998 to 2008, Greece had organized almost 48% of all the strikes, general strikes in Europe. And this is really, really big and annoying for IMF, but they ignore that in Greece there is no workplace level union representation. And something quite scandalous is the fact that the tax burden for corporate profits in Greece was almost half that of the EU 25, which was almost 16% out of 33% up to 2010. So all those data make us think that obviously Greek people are not to blame for really what happened in Greece after 2010. And other neoliberal narratives. You have so many public servants, as for example the ex-minister of health used to say that we have so many public servants in this country, more than 2 million, and suddenly they realized that after an audit investigation that it's almost 700,000 public sector workers, and if you exclude education and health and so on, it's less than that. It's about 450. And Troika has urged to reduce this amount of workers by 150,000 people up to 2015. And actually Greece, as you will see in this table, has one of the lowest rates of public servants as a ratio, as a percentage of public servants to the labor force across the OECD countries. Other negative features, dismissals that were rising all the time in the last decades. Nevertheless, despite all those important things, and of course we can find more data to get angry, more data to realize how hypocritical is the situation with the memorandum agreements. Nevertheless, the recipe, the medicine that was proposed by Troika and the Greek government and the Greek elites and the Federation of Greek Industry and the modernizers and all advocates of flexible labor markets was to have internal devaluation policies, to follow strategies that are focused only on wages, that they are trying to make an economy more competitive by looking on the cost and especially labor cost. And of course, Greece was the country that had the most massive cuts in wages and other adjustments. They started with the public sector and the pensions, and they continue, of course, with the changes in the private sector. So I'm skipping some slides. We can talk about the data here. Here is something interesting. It's also interesting not only in purely economic terms, but also in terms of democracy, right? Because here you will see that the changes in wages and salary were different, and actually the most impressive cuts in the wages and the salaries of public sector workers in Europe took place in the countries that IMF had established a package of austerity. And Greece, of course, was one of them, of those countries. So I'm reversing now the question. So if it's a Greek exceptionalism, what's going on in Greece? If what happened in Greece is something that is related only to factors that are structural and related to the Greek economy, the Greek society, and the labor markets in Greece, why in all other troubled economies and gradually in all Europe actually we follow the same measures, the same policies that increase marketization, deregulation of labor markets, and put at risk democracy and the employment social order? As this guy says from New York, obviously, we are all in the same boat. And I like this phrase because it's the phrase of Pagalos, the vice prime minister of the previous government of Papandreou, that they were the most inspiring votes of people of the IMF programs, because they actually want to convince everyone in this planet, and especially the Greeks, that we are all part of this. We created this debt together. Huh? You wanted to go on holiday for 4 days. You created your debt. You wanted a higher pension, right? You created this debt. And to ignore all those aspects of mismanagement, all those aspects of the Eurozone project, all other issues that are related to the way the global financial system operates. And disappointingly, the mainstream trade unions in Europe organized only some day actions. This is the new trick for the bureaucratic unionism in Europe, to have a one-day action in solidarity of Greece. It's not a bad thing, right? But it's not enough. It's not enough. The attack on human rights, the attack on democracy in Europe is much more serious, demands more urgent and ongoing situations. We have to make those issues more international, and we have to institutionalize and Europeanize, if not globalize, of course, the social struggle. Because, from the other side, Angela Merkel has managed to Europeanize the modernization, the deregulation of the legal and economic order in Europe. The most important of that has to do with the fiscal compact agreement that in a sense turns the European dream into a nightmare. The fiscal compact in a sense is an agreement that acts as a brake to deficits and debts at national level, but at the same time it's a way to make the Commission, the European Commission, the most important influential actor of policy making, because they abolish the veto and the reverse majority rule orders, because they impose sanctions on the member states if, for example, they want to increase the budget for schools or the budget that they spend for other welfare programs, and because this is a mechanism that has internal validity according to Angela Merkel's words. So much pain in the last 5 years in Greece. Where is the glory? There is no glory. Despite the haircuts, despite the deregulation, despite the social misery that is spreading, and I'm sorry for giving you so much depressive comments on Friday night, right? In New York, you would expect something more extravaganza, let's say, but I'm sorry, this is the situation. Unfortunately, the debt level is rising all the time, and it's supposed to reach the level of 180-something% at the end of 2013. So much pain for nothing. And worse than that, Greece is trapped into a deep recession. A deep recession that increases dramatically the reserve army of unemployed and precarious, vulnerable, insecure workers. Unemployment is about 27%, and please be careful when I'm talking about unemployment, I'm talking about the registered unemployment. And the labor force survey registered unemployed people, even if they have worked only for 1 hour during the reference week of the survey. Right? That's quite interesting. It's almost 60% for young people, unemployment. About 450 households have no income at all. Almost 200,000 companies, private companies, small basically, have closed their operations. Many others, they are not able, they don't have the capacity to pay their employees. That's why the average wage reductions are about 30 to 40%. A lot of bad things like fast-track privatizations with dodgy deals, sometimes like what is going on with El Dorado, this Canadian company with the gold mining, or with the Costco in the port of Piraeus, that they have established two types. Now we have two ports in Piraeus, one owned by Costco, that they have different terms and conditions of employment, and one that is still under the state control. And it's like two different separate worlds in the same place, because in a sense Greece is gradually turning to become a new zone of freedom for more investments, with no state restrictions, with no ethical restrictions sometimes, all right? And perhaps we will have time to talk about it. So you are familiar with David Harvey in the States, accumulation by dispossession. This is what's going on in Greece. They take more resources and assets from the state in order to give it to the markets and to create more markets with their own mechanisms and their own rules, with no transparency of what's going on. We have a lot of dodgy deals, and I'm pretty sure the next months we will learn a lot about new scandals. Already in the news, in the newspapers in Greece, you will find a lot of situations. So the most important thing, though, is the fact that the picture of health for the population is really, really concerning. For example, we have a dramatic increase in commit suicides. We have cases of deliberately infection, self-infection by people to HIV diseases in order to get access to benefits, according to this study by a colleague in Cambridge University. And we have a dramatic rise in the proportion of the population that is seeking medical attention from street clinics. I think this is the most important thing, plus of course the unfortunate popularity of Golden Dawn among certain groups of the population. So, saying all this, I think there is no big surprise why in Greece we have such a growing anti-austerity movement. And I think the resistance in Greece is almost complete. In my view, it will be fully completed when Syriza takes the power and starts implementing a new program that will provide more justice and will protect democracy in this country and, of course, Europe, and globally speaking. And it's a kind of a puzzle of resistance that consists of those 6 elements: strikes and civil disobedience, in synthesis, legal activism, reverting to bartering economy trends, the rise of radical unionism, the Greek Indignados Occupy movement, and of course the rise of Syriza.
What the radical unionism is?
Yes. Thanks, John. I'm going to that. Just a few words. Are we okay? Or you're...
Yeah.
All right. It's okay. 29 general strikes have taken place in Greece since the departure of the Troika in this country in May 2010. Numerous strikes and occupations of government buildings has also taken place. And of course we have the rise of what we call the movement Don't Pay, that was used in the cases of ordinary citizens that they didn't pay. How you call them? Sorry?
Tolls.
Yes, the tolls in the national highways and so on. Legal activism. It was one of the first things that trade unions and other social actors tried to do, because the ratification of the memorandum agreements was not actually so constitutional, all right? And we can talk about it later on. But we had some fortunate outcomes of that. In October 2012, the Council of Europe, with basically the European Committee of the Social Rights, and the ILO responded in a very positive manner to the appeals that the Greek Trade Union Confederation made, in the sense that the memorandum agreements represent a pure violation of fundamental principles like the ILO Convention number 87 and 98 about the freedom of collective bargaining and the decent wages for young workers. There are about 300 associations and small networks at community level that they exchange food by not using euros, by having their own currencies. Is not so widespread as it was, for example, the trueque markets in Argentina. But it's a sign that at least local communities, local societies, they try to cope with the notion of risk and to take the future, their own future, in their own hands. Radical unionism, I think this is really, really important, John. We have more than 45 new unions that have been established in the last 3 years. This is basically an urban phenomenon. And what I'm saying, radical unions, I'm talking about with the same way as another American, Kim Moody, has defined them. Militant, in collective bargaining, transparent, and with horizontal structures, deeply democratic and participative. And many of those unions, they have a leftist or even anarchist-oriented leadership. It's a very interesting element in the Greek territory of unionism. It's not only in Greece, of course. Actually, I'm editing at the moment a book about radical unionism in Europe, and we realize that this is growing. Of course, we cannot say that this is a recipe for success. Radical unionism cannot be transplanted into a recipe for success. It's a small island in a broader ocean of deregulation. But it's really, really important because it creates a lot of narratives of victory for workers, that they boost confidence, and at the same time they put a lot of strains to the social democratic unions. And this is something, a new trend in Europe, that we have a crisis of the social democratic unionism. In Greece, we have already signs of that, even in the big trade unions. And I'm pretty sure that we will see a lot of big developments in the future. Actually, Syriza is supporting, and the idea I have to organize with the GLI, the Global Labour Institute, a GLI network in Athens, and we will organize an event in June in order to discuss how we can build unionism from the grassroots, because this is what people need. From the grassroots, by building broader coalitions with other social groups, with media, friendly media to radical views and values, and to build stronger links with local communities. Now, οι δειγνάδος, οι αγανακτισμένοι, as we say in Greek, was also a very important case and aspect of the resistance in Greece. Why? Because it was the first time that we saw in Syntagma Square and all over Greece, actually, in the big, basically in big urban areas, we saw for the first time in the streets workers with different identities marching together, talking together for the same reasons against the austerity. It was the first time that we have, let's say, the creation of intergenerational solidarity, young and old workers together, a solidarity between public and private sector workers. Even migrants were there. It was the first time that we saw a unity of working class happening in Greece outside of the typical, let's say, frames of national elections, of politics actually, micro-politics of the big political parties. So it was an upsurge of anger and desperation sometimes, or against what's going on. And there was all the studies that took place on that period indicated that the movement of Indignados had wider social acceptance. And for this reason, I think this type of Occupy movement will still be very popular, and they will come back in Greece in the near future. What the Indignados movement, though, in Greece has to tell us, in my view, and has to teach us, is that what Gramsci has said a long time ago, that if the ruling class has lost its concession, it is no longer leading, but it's only dominant. So what is left in the ruling class? Only police brutality. And the Indignados movement was masked by unacceptable police brutality in the streets of Athens and other parts of the country. It was another indication that the old is dying and the new cannot be born situation. And what's this new? I hope this is the case, all right? This new thing is Syriza, all right? I think Natasha described really well the reasons that Syriza managed to go into that stage of challenging now the power in the government. And this is a plethora of reasons why this is happening. Natasha already mentioned some of them. In my view, the most important thing is that Syriza is the main agent of anti-austerity movement in Greece. And is the main agent since the start of the crisis. And it was the main agent and remains the main agent with a view that it's not just enough to complain about the situation, but to go into a stage that we can change things. Syriza was not afraid to talk about victory in elections, about broader coalitions with other left-wing parties, about opening the door to working class people, but also to middle classes. And Syriza is now in a fortunate position to move forward this project of kicking out of the country the Troika and all those neoliberal jokers that they want to make Greece and Europe new colonies for big monopolies. There are also other important reasons why Syriza managed to go into that, and this has to do with the battle of ideas. Partly this is a typical event. We are all here. I mean, we spent part of our social time on Friday evening to discuss about issues of democracy and justice. And Syriza has a lot of people who are doing this. Has a lot of people also in privileged positions in universities, in a lot of artists, a lot of journalists. So a lot of ideas can come out of a party that has this type of nature. Of course, there was also a strong presence in social media, the street politics, community action. In my view, it has a young and charismatic leader, and this was a sign of change that people demand now in Greece, especially people of my age, 37 years old. We demanded change. Well, actually, I left Greece because I was fed up with those strong power relationships that they were established in the Greek academia, and we demanded change. It's not just an economic issue, it's also a cultural issue. It's also an issue that we need also justice in our daily life routines. And Syriza represents all of those things. So I will finish here. Radical unionism, in my view, and social movements has a long and hard way to go, but perhaps Syriza few months or even weeks to come. The crucial issue is what we have to do afterwards.